Jay and Barry's book, Peter Pan's, opens on a young girl named Wendy Darling spending her final night in her family's nursery. Her parents have decided that it is time for her to leave her childhood ways, like drawing treasure maps, creating stories, and even staying in the nursery itself. During her final night in the nursery, Wendy and her brothers John and Michael are visited by a young boy named Peter Pan. He teaches them how to fly, and they all journey to Neverland together. During their time in Neverland, they fight pirates, swim with mermaids, and even save princesses. While in Neverland, Wendy begins to perform the role of mother to Peter's followers, also known as Lost Boys. She begins to comfort them and even sing them to sleep. She invites the Lost Boys to return with her to England in order to truly understand what a mother's love feels like. However, Peter Pan refuses to let them leave because he does not want them to grow up. Peter Pan's desire to not grow up comes from the fact that no one has called him to a higher standard in life. This higher standard is beginning to act more like adult at a younger age. We see this trend also with American teens in today's society. America's lack of use of rites of passages has caused adolescent behavior to be pushed further into adulthood. In order to talk about my thesis, we must define two terms, both adolescent and what a rite of passage is. Adolescence is the stage of development between childhood and adulthood. The most common age range given when referring to adolescence is from 13 to 18. This coincides with both the entrance and exit of puberty. However, in recent years, this age of adolescence is being extended further into the adult years. The next age range is from 13 to 25, which includes those who have not yet completed college. And the other age range is from 13 to 29, to include those who are not yet married. This extension of the age of adolescence to almost 11 years from its original set range is a problem because it means that people who hold adult leadership positions are still acting like children. Jeffrey Jensen Arnett, in his book Emerging Adulthood, gives 4 circumstances for why this age of adolescence is being extended. They're the technical revolution, sexual revolution, youth movement, and feminist movement. These 4 reasons are causing adolescence to be continued into further in the adult years. Historically, 18 has been the defining marker for entering into the adult years. And however, we have not needed an event to be established in order to promote this transition. Rather, it's just expected of the youth. In today's society, however, we have 7 defining marker events for entering into adulthood. They are leaving your parents' home for the final time, finishing one's education, getting a full-time job, reaching economic self-sufficiency, getting married, having children, and establishing an independent household. The second term we need to define is what a rite of passage is. A rite of passage is a clearly established experience that promotes a status change within an individual and thus instills cultural values and precedents within that individual. Rites of passages have many functions for those who undergo them. The first is that it introduces initiates into the rite of communal living. That initiate undergoes an experience that is also shared by others who undergo that same rite of passage. Therefore, they all have a shared bond because of the shared experience. The second function that a rite of passage can provide is that it introduces the initiate into both adult privileges and challenges. However, they have that new community through the shared bond to be able to guide them through this new time. Rites of passages also have many impacts for those who undergo them. The first is that they are to instill cultural values. We see that rites of passages hold a part that the culture holds dear and promotes it through their celebration. It also provides a transformation of attitude and behavior. There is usually the giving up of a weaker or childish mindset and the taking on of a more mature and adult-like mindset. It also provides a severance with childhood ties. Americans lack the consistent and effectual use of rites of passages throughout their culture. Rites of passages are important to establish within a community because they set clear precedents for their use. We will be looking at 2 parts of American subculture that are a healthy example of how rites of passages are to be used within a community, both the bar mitzvah and the quinceañera. Both of these rites of passages are considered to be significant cultural practices and set clear transitions for the use of their society. The bar mitzvah occurs when a young boy turns the age of 13. He is now responsible for Jewish law, tradition, and ethics. Because of this, He has now become fully responsible for his religious life. This duty used to be held by the father, but now the boy is deemed mature enough to take on that full accountability for himself. The father was now punishable, but now the boy has taken that weight upon himself. We also see that he is now given new responsibilities at home and church. By being allowed to participate in the minyan, he may be called upon to read the Torah in the synagogue, and he may be allowed to fast and pray. We see that the bar mitzvah is made up of a ceremonial procedure and educational process and these new responsibilities. The bar mitzvah is an important rite of passage within the Jewish community because it helps promote that earlier maturity through that boy taking on the full responsibility of his religious life. The quinceañera is the second rite of passage which we will talk about, which occurs in the Latino community when a young girl turns the age of 15. It is made up of two parts, both Mass and the celebratory dancing. During the Mass, everyone will attend a service in which that celebrated girl will be called upon to pray. She thanks God for how far He has brought her in her life, and is thus honoring her religion. We see that part of cultural value that we have in rites of passages in this Mass, and now how it is a significant part of the Latino community. The second part of the quinceañera is the celebratory dancing. This uses symbolism to mark clear transitions out of childhood and entrance into womanhood. The first dance the young girl performs with a close family member or friend, and a former toy of hers. This dance symbolizes that she is saying goodbye to her childhood by the giving up of childish ways like playing with toys. The second dance the girl will perform in a pair of flat shoes. After the dance commences, the father will present her with a pair of high heels. This is to show that she is now gaining responsibilities, but also more adult freedoms like being allowed to date, which is helping her gain her entrance into womanhood. And the third symbolism that is used in a quinceañera is the presentation of the crown and the medal. The crown shows that the girl is considered to be a princess in the eyes of her family, and the medal shows that she is honored and loved by those around her. The quinceañera is an important rite of passage because it marks that clear transition out of childhood through the giving up of the childish ways like playing with toys, and she has that clear entrance into womanhood through gaining of more adult freedoms and responsibilities. Americans have several established rites of passages, such as graduating, voting, and getting married. However, they're experiencing declining participation rates in these established rites of passages. 83% of Americans graduated. 53% of Americans cast a vote in the 2016 election, and 29% of Americans from age 18 to 34 are currently married. These statistics show that Americans are participating in the rites of passages that I just mentioned. However, because of the actual declining rates in these rites of passages, adolescents are extending their behavior further into their adult years. Graduation is considered to be a rite of passage because that individual is now able to make decisions for himself. He'll decide who he wants to be, where he wants to go, and ultimately what he wants to do with his life. This allows him to take full responsibility for what he wants his life to look like. It is also one of those early markers of adulthood that I talked about. Almost 2,000 high schools across the U.S. are expected to graduate less than 60% of their students. This number shows that graduation is no longer in high participation as it once was. Rather, it is seen as an option that teens may opt out of if they don't feel the need for it. Voting is considered to be a rite of passage because it allows that individual to make decisions for themselves, but they also get to take part in just making decisions for their country. If one does not vote, they lose out on that sense of freedom to be able to make a decision for themselves, and they become dependent on someone else to make the decision for them. Voting rate for ages 18 to 24 has dropped to 39%. If we continue to lose this young adult range of voting, we will eventually lose out on our young voice voting in our society. Marriage is considered to be a rite of passage because it promotes a status change between living in solitude to joining in union with another mission. It has the communal aspect that rites of passages has by the joining in union of family, friends, lives, and jobs. It, like graduation, is also one of those early markers of adulthood. We see, however, that the four circumstances that Arnett gives is causing the age of marriage to be pushed further back. In 1960, the average age for women to get married was 20, and for men it was 22. But however, because of these four circumstances, The age of entrance into marriage for women is now 26, and for men it is 28. One of the reasons that Americans are experiencing this declining participation rates and the rites of passages is because Americans hold very low expectations for their teens. An example of these low expectations is the hands-on parenting style known as lawnmower parents. Lawnmower parents are parents that push down every single difficult task within their child's way in order to allow that child to walk through with a life of ease and comfort. However, this parenting style is ultimately harmful to that child because they are not able to deal with difficult tasks by their own ability. But rather, while they are adult, they will still be dependent on someone else to deal with these matters. Therefore, that parent should allow that child to deal with these difficult circumstances while they are younger, and there's still that net and safety from the parent to help guide them through life. The lack of rite of passage participation in the lives of teens is causing them to create their own expectations for lives. When talking about rites of passages as a framework for community intervention in the lives of youth, David Blumenkreuz writes, "In the absence of meaningful community-based ritual, youths will create their own defining marker events based on peers or media values, many of which are ultimately harmful both individually or communally. We see that teens will continue their adolescent behavior until they understand and reach an event that gives them expectations for how to act like an adult, like a rite of passage can provide. However, for some teens, they may never reach this defining marker event in their life, and therefore will continue their teenage behavior all the way throughout their adult years. Rites of passages for adolescents promotes earlier adolescent maturity through the benefits that it provides. The benefits that it provides is beginning to act like an adult at an earlier age. It gains them access into being able to deal with more difficult tasks for themselves, and it also allows them to begin to accomplish more adulthood markers. The bar mitzvah provides the benefit of that Jewish boy taking on that full religious responsibility for his own life. He is no longer dependent on his father to provide that religious life for himself, but he himself takes on that responsibility. It is also proven that those who undergo a bar mitzvah are actually more likely to accomplish other rites of passages such as marriage. When one does not vote, quinceañeras provide the benefit of that clear exit out of childhood through the giving up of childish ways like playing with toys, and that taking on of the more mature mindset by beginning to gain access into adult freedoms and responsibilities. We see that clear severance with childhood ties that the impacts of rites of passages should provide. While there are many benefits to participating in rites of passages, there are also consequences for not participating in them. When one does not graduate, it actually lowers their chances of being able to receive a higher paying job. It is also failure to complete one of those early markers of becoming an adult. The high school dropouts cost the U.S. almost $260 billion in lost tax revenue, tax wages, and even productivity over their lifetime. Not voting has the consequence that you lose your freedom to be able to make a decision for yourself, and you become dependent on someone to make the decision for you. Eventually, we will see that if this trend of not voting plays out, America will actually lose its pride and sense of democracy. Not marriage is a little different because it does not have necessarily a direct consequence. Rather, it has a loss of benefits. One of the loss of benefits is the blessing of children. God intended man to be fruitful and multiply, and when one does not get married, they are losing out on that opportunity to have the blessing of children. We also see that there is a sense of accountability that comes when getting married. When two spouses will get married, they have that accountability to each other to be the best mature version of themselves, and they also spur on that other person. So when we take away that role of the spouse, that person has no desire to mature for that other individual. Rites of passages are important to establish because they help provide that earlier entrance into adult years by giving that maturity, and their benefits are one of the ways to provide this. When talking about my thesis, there are two main disagreements that can come about. The first is about the consistency of rites of passages. Both sides can agree that rites of passages are being used. However, the debate is about the consistency and effectiveness of those rites of passages. One view is that Americans do consistently use rites of passages because numbers are still being produced for that participation rate. they claim that about 3.7 million graduates are expected to graduate this year of 2019 to 2020. Nearly 56% of voting age population, also known as VAP, cast a ballot in the 2016 election. And about 2.13 million marriages occurred across the U.S. in 2018. These all show that rites of passages are being participated in. I also agree that these rites of passages are being participated in, but I will present statistics that show that these rites of passages are actually having declining rates of participation. One research shows that by next year, colleges will see a high school graduating cohort that is smaller by 81,000 students, a dip of 2.3%. After a few years of this minimal growth, the report projects that from 2027 to 2032, the annual graduation totals will be smaller by 150,000 to 220,000 people than the ones that the nation had in 2013. This shows that we are losing that graduation number, and it will continue to decrease further. 55.7% of voting age population ranks the U.S. actually 26 out of 32 countries in the OECD. While America might experience an average number within itself, when we compare that number globally, they actually rank very low. The second debate is about whether teens are growing up in a consistent and timely manner. I believe that they are not, and Arnett's 4 circumstances showed that that average age of marriage is pushing back, and therefore they aren't maturing in a timely manner as we've seen before. A psychiatrist at Columbia says, 25 is the new 18, and delayed adolescence is no longer a theory, but rather is a reality. Rites of passages are important because they allow that adult maturity to occur earlier in time to produce that earlier adult years in that child. In conclusion, Americans are experiencing a lack of participation in their rites of passages. But both the quinceañera and the bar mitzvah are healthy examples of how one should use a rite of passage within a community. The lack of participation in these rites of passages is causing adolescent behavior to be pushed back further into adulthood. And when teens are not participating in these rites of passages, they are losing out on the benefits of their life. The quinceañera provided that benefit of that clear severance with childhood ties, and the bar mitzvah gained that transformation of attitude and behavior by taking on that responsibility for their religious life. We also see that there are consequences when one does not participate in a rite of passage. When one does not graduate, they lower their chances of being able to receive a higher paying job. Not voting will eventually cause America to lose its democracy. In response, Americans should begin to strengthen their celebration of rites of passages. One of the ways to do this is the role of the parents. Parents can have the duty to teach their children all the benefits that can come from graduating. They can also teach and educate their children on what a dutiful and effective vote means for their country. And Christian parents have the obligation to teach their children what the blessing of marriage means from God, and how children can come from that. This teaching American teens about their rites of passage will ultimately show their cultural significance. And the strengthened celebration of rites of passage will help combat that trend of pushing adolescent behavior further into the adult years. Thank you.
Awesome job.